coming along this afternoon. We have a fairly full agenda, so I hope you'll find it informative and interesting, and as ever, it's designed to be interactive. First of all, we're going to have two short presentations or updates. The first is from Chris Pressler, our new university librarian, with his initial thoughts and ambitions for one of our most amazing assets in this university. And then secondly, Simon will give us an update on new leadership model, new management model, and where we're going with the student life cycle project. I'm going to say a few words at the beginning, and then we'll have 40 minutes for Q&A. And we have some new technology to try out to help us with that Q&A. The first thing I'd like to do, as we do for all these sessions, is to introduce you to my professional services leadership team. It's always good, isn't it, to be able to put a face to a name. It helps with those emails or those telephone calls to know who you're talking to and to feel that you're building that relationship with the other person. So I'm going to invite all my PSLT colleagues and deputies where there are deputies to just stand up, turn around and introduce yourselves to our audience, please. And Wayne is also going to be our interim DOFO for humanities.
I don't think I'm deputising
I think you are at the minute. It always feels like you're doing 3 jobs in one anyway.
Good afternoon, I'm Julian Stern, I'm the Director of Social Responsibility and I'm representing myself.
Hi, I'm Andrew Walsh, I'm Director of Research Services. Good afternoon, I'm Simon Merriweather, I'm Director of Student Experience.
Hi, good afternoon, I'm Chris Presser, the University Librarian.
Hi, David Barker, I'm glad they started at that end of the line. Director of Compliance.
Hi, I'm Matt Whitehead, Chief Information Officer.
Hi, Sinead Hess, Director of Legal Affairs and Board Secretariat.
We will be the judge of that. Great, thank you all very much, colleagues. One of these days we'll turn the tables round and you can work out who is who and tell them who you are. Okay, so there's a couple of things I'd like to just talk about briefly. One is the university vision and strategic plan, and the second is our professional services plan and where we're thinking of going with professional services. But first of all, what I want to say to you is that I've only been here now for 6 months, but I've visited 51 different parts of the university so far. And I'm telling you that because I want to let you know how committed I am to the promise that I made when I joined this university. I am really serious about engaging and listening and responding to each and every one of you about where we take professional services and where we take this university, working in partnership with all of our colleagues. While I'm on that theme, staff survey is open. We are up at 49% so far. That's really wonderful. It would be fantastic if we could do really, really well across the whole of professional services and achieve something like 85% or higher. All the completion rates are available for your areas. So if you don't know what it is, you can ask us and we'll be able to share it with you. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of completing the survey. It doesn't take very long. And I can assure you that we take it very seriously. You know, particularly in the current climate where there's a lot of uncertainty internally and externally, understanding how you feel about things about well-being, for example, is incredibly important to all of us, to all of us. But if you don't complete the survey and have your say, you're not going to have your say. So please do that. One of the things that just continues to strike me really powerfully from all the people that I've met in this university is a real commitment to make a difference to people's lives. I don't think we can put it any simpler than that. That's the reason why we all come to work every day. We all want to make a real contribution. We all want to be the best that we can possibly be. So I think we have a real opportunity in the here and now. We're at a really pivotal point where we're determining our university's future vision and direction. We all, I think, have an opportunity to make an important contribution to what happens with our university in the years to come. And particularly, you and we have got a great chance to create a blueprint for the type of professional services that we want in this university in the future. So I mentioned the university's vision and strategic plan, an enormous piece of work that Matt and colleagues have been leading on. And you'll hear more about it in the weeks that come, how we're responding to and building on the feedback from the Our Future consultation in our university, which was really incredibly powerful. And the number of colleagues who engaged with it was incredibly high and shows a great deal of engagement in the university, which I think is really, really important and something we should build on. But one of the important themes that's coming out of first of all, the consultation, but secondly, how we're responding to it and how we're developing our university's strategic plan, is putting our people and our values at the heart of what we do in this university. And that's really, really powerful. And visually, you'll see it's at the heart of everything that we do. And it's not just about people. It's also about what helps people to do their work really well. It's about organizational development. It's about technology. It's about systems. It's about processes. All of those things come into our people and our values. But particularly our values. And we do have values in the university. We apply them every day, but we don't have a shared set of values in the university. And so I'm nominally leading, but Sally and Rachel and colleagues are particularly working on engaging with each and every member of the university to understand what our shared values are in the university. And I don't just mean the trite things that you sometimes see in value statements, but what really makes Manchester, what's that Manchester-ness that's really important to us, makes what we believe anyway, makes us distinctive as a university. So when you hear about it, please do engage with the project and have your say. Have your say. We had the Professional Services Leadership Conference about a week ago, and that was a really powerful day where we had a couple of key sessions, both on what's happening in the external world, but also on one individual's views and experiences through his career in the services that helped him develop his understanding of what good leadership looks like and what values looks like. And it helped all of us to think about what leadership means in the university. We talked a lot about how it can be difficult as a leader. You know, we can get frustrated when things don't work the way that they should. We sometimes have to make difficult decisions. And then we have to do our best to explain them to our colleagues. All of that's an important part of leadership. And as leaders, we need to be at the forefront of creating new ways of doing things, leading by example, and stopping doing things that don't work anymore. That's something that we are incredibly poor at in universities. We seem to just increasingly add more and more to what we're trying to achieve. So we need to try new things, and we need not to be afraid to fail, so long as we learn from them and move on. But leading change, particularly in a time like this, can be tough, but it can also be incredibly rewarding. And I want all of our leaders and everybody in this university to understand how we're going to approach change in the university, how we'll deal with the external changes that are coming, and dealing with change which really is part of the norm for us now in the university sector. We need to understand that change brings opportunities as well as risks, and we need to understand how we can identify those opportunities and make the most of them, because there are opportunities that come along. So those are the two things that are happening at the moment, and I can answer a bit more when we do the Q&A. Some things, of course, haven't moved on very much at all. Dare I mention Brexit and what is and isn't happening around Brexit. The Auger report, the review of post-18 funding in the UK, has been put back again, and we're not expecting to hear about it until late May at the earliest. And there's likely to be a consultation when it has been published. But what we are assuming it is going to say is that it will recommend a reduction in the top-line fee for home and EU students in the UK. It's going to be accompanied by an assumption or an assertion that the Treasury should make up the difference in funding for UK universities. But I don't know what you think about that, but I suspect it's highly unlikely the Treasury will be able to or want to make up that difference. And the third major uncertainty that we continue to face, of course, is pensions, USS pensions. That's an issue that's still unresolved. And there's an awful lot of work going on in the background to try and find at least a short-term solution that's manageable for all parties, to give us the breathing space to come up with a long-term sustainable solution for pension provision in the university sector, not just in our university. And I hope we will find a solution to that in the not-too-distant future. Now, I mentioned new technology. The new technology is Slido. There's a web address and there's a code. So if you log in on your phones or your laptops, it's very, very easy to use. And you can submit a question for the Q&A today. I don't know whether it saves it for the future, but if we don't get to answer it today, we will make sure that any questions you do ask us today, that we come back to you with an answer after our meeting. This session is being videoed, so those who are watching live can also ask a question as we go through the session. But if you're watching it on demand, a bit like TV, you can't submit a question. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Chris Pressler.
Thanks, Patrick. I wanted to just take the opportunity of thanking all my colleagues on PSLT, and indeed everyone who I've met at the University of Manchester since I started in February, for such a warm welcome, and particularly thank you to Patrick for taking the risk of handing an open mic to another Irishman. Okay, there we go. I was asked just to give a few thoughts on, I guess, first thoughts, first impressions on joining the University of Manchester. I've been working in libraries for a long time. This is my 5th library directorship. But coming to Manchester, as any of my peers would agree, is a particular privilege. It is, in my profession anyway, one of quite widely regarded as one of the best library jobs in the world. And I just wanted to reflect that a little bit in terms of what we're saying and going forward in the library. I know most of you will know this, but there's perhaps a couple of things that I just want to restate in terms of as a new starter, if you like, in the university. Many of you will already know that the University of Manchester Library is widely regarded as the 3rd largest library system in the UK after Oxford and Cambridge, but I think perhaps it's important to note that we would easily, apologies for anyone watching this from Cambridge, easily rank 2nd in terms of our special collections holdings, not just in the John Rylance, but also across our library services. And another colleague of mine at another major library in Research Libraries UK said that we could go further than that and say that we could eyeball the Bodleian. which I think is a great strapline for our next library plan. But the serious point there is that this is one of the most significant library systems in not just in the UK, but across Europe and in the world. And it's a great responsibility and a great privilege to join that. We are a member of, now you know librarians love our acronyms, we are a member of something snappily titled COLIM, which stands for Cambridge, Oxford, UCL, Imperial and Manchester. The interesting thing there is we're in that group by research funding, not through library scale. So it's an institutional membership. So you can see where Manchester sits in the way we view the world anyway, in that group. I think one of the most exciting aspects of coming to the University of Manchester Library is, although we have very, very significant special collections and print collections, we're the largest, indeed largest non-legal deposit library in the UK. We're also the largest library in terms of our digital holdings, and that's an interesting thing, I think, in the way that the library will be working closely now with professional services. Many of you running departments and within departments will have similar stats to the last one, but our one for the libraries is that we do serve over 3 million students, researchers and public visitors every year, and about 300,000 of those alone are through the John Rylands. So the figures that we're handling are really very significant indeed. I've only got a couple of slides really to just let you know what I'm thinking about in terms of initial impressions. One of those, I guess, is around our challenges, and there are many, many challenges. This could easily be an hour-long presentation in its own right, but I think some of the top-level challenges from the library's perspective, not wishing to repeat what Patrick said in terms of the university's significant challenges which impact directly on the library, such as Brexit. But we're really looking at the management of growth. Libraries always grow in terms of their collections and their remit. Obviously, we're trying to manage that in a what I've generously termed changing climate. It's very important for us that we work as closely as possible with the university. A great university needs a great library and vice versa. And my sense has always been that a really successful university library is a direct reflection of its institutional ambition and priorities as experienced by its students and its scholars. And then just jumping through to the last one there, that I think it's really important for us as a library. Libraries are not, by nature, income-generating parts of the university. We are of the university. We're funded through students and research. But with that comes a responsibility on us, I think, to be absolutely clear that we are owned by all. Every library, even little tiny public libraries, are shared resources, and very large research libraries such as ours are exactly the same in that, so we're not an end in ourselves. We will be looking at some new measures, some of them perhaps more statistical than others, but some of the ones that are more qualitative, I guess, here, or quantitative, I guess, in some ways, are around this idea that we'll be measuring our success through trust. I think it's really important that every part of the university feels trusted and is trusted by other parts, and this is an ethos that runs really quite deep in the library services. So we're looking at ways that we'll be trusted by the institution to deliver university-wide initiatives and values, trusted by researchers to assist scholarship, but also to enable new discovery and dissemination, and aspects of that will be really important as the publishing world continues to go through quite significant change. I think you'll know that the libraries are already highly valued by our students. We are not complacent, but we do get quite high NSS scores for the libraries, but there's an awful lot more that we could do to tell the stories, if you like, of our students through our libraries. It's often, apart from not necessarily the pub, let's say halls and lecture theatres, it's probably the space where the students spend most time during their university lives, and we take that role really seriously. I mentioned the John Rylands, but all of our libraries are open to the public. You may or may not know, but we have nearly 20,000 members of the public as members of University of Manchester Library. and being inspirational and being memorable are at the core of that experience. And then finally, it's really important for us as we move into professional services formally, particularly I think with my appointment, that we are open to delivering partnerships right across the way professional services operates in all of these areas, in our estate, through our technologies, through our services, which are very significant, and of course through our own people in terms of talent. So thank you very much.
So good afternoon. As Patrick said in the introduction, I'm going to give you just a brief update of the new leadership model student experience work that has started at the very end of last year. And I'm going to give you a sense of where that is up to and some of the things that we're going to be doing next as well. I also, because he mentioned it in the introduction, but it wasn't on the brief, will give you a brief update on SLP as well. So thank you for that challenge. New leadership model, first of all. This, for those to jog your memories, we've talked about this in previous of these sessions. This is about some changes that we have been bringing about principally in the faculties, the schools and DSE, aimed at improving the way that we support our students. So this is very much directed at the student experience. It may not always feel like that, particularly for some of those involved as we've gone through that change period over the last few months or so. But fundamentally at its heart, this is what we are trying to achieve. It's about trying to bring greater consistency to some of the structures and the roles that we have. It's about trying to bring a greater level of understanding and clarity about the way that we support our students, the accountability for certain activities and responsibilities, greater clarity about where those responsibilities sit within the university. And at the moment it's, in some cases, a little inconsistent. At the moment, in some cases, we have arguably underinvested in some areas and some aspects of the student experience. And I would cite student support as one example of that. So this is a really big opportunity for us to look afresh at many of those aspects. Now, what we've been doing over the last several months, so the we is principally myself and the 3 directors of faculty operations, all of whom are embodied in Wayne at the front here. He's got a skirt on the bottom half, for those that couldn't see a little earlier. What we've been doing over the last few months is going through a formal period of consultation and making some changes to roles at grades 8 and 9 in DSE, the faculties and the schools. And I will just refer to my notes. So that has been around 58 roles in total within the scope of that change. 25 new roles have been introduced as a result of that, and there's been a net loss, or there will be a net loss of 9 roles as a consequence. There's been some reshaping, some reconfiguration, but importantly, a far greater emphasis within all of those roles on providing leadership around the student experience in this university. And that's the fundamental change and the fundamental driver that's been pushing us through in terms of those posts. We have just about filled all of those roles now. We've been through a lot of that consultation and change process. We still have 2 of the grade 9 roles in BMH to fill, and those are out for external advert at the moment. And then we have a number of sort of 7 or 8, I believe, from memory, grade 8 roles, which we are also now just about to advertise, and you'll see those coming out very shortly. Where we have filled roles at the moment, if you want to get an update on where we have done that and the people that have been appointed to those roles, some of you will have seen that cascaded through your areas. If not, you can go onto StaffNet and just put in /NLM, and the revised structures with the names and so on are on there and available to see. Now, having done that, over the course of the spring and into the summer period, we'll now move into some further work looking more broadly in terms of what we are calling the new management model. So this is essentially then looking at the teams that will sit and report to those roles that we've just put in place, and principally in the first instance, but not it doesn't quite wholly work out like this, but principally this is then looking at grade 6 and 7 roles, again in faculties, the schools and DSE. The reason I say it doesn't wholly work out like that is, of course, what you're doing there fundamentally is putting some blocks in place, some building blocks that will determine where particular activities might sit within the organisation once we make any further changes. Now, a really important point to make, and I've said this when we've talked about some of this previously, is that we are trying very hard to try and achieve some of these changes in a more consultative, more open, more engaged way than we have done previously. So as we move forward into this next phase with looking at structures around grade 6 and 7 roles, we will be taking, for instance, a number of inputs to start with that have quite a large number of people have already been involved with. So that will include, for instance, some of the co-creation work that's been done within the Faculty of Science and Engineering, where they've been thinking about some of their own structures and now moving into an interim structure. All of the work that's been done in SLP that informs things around processes and opportunities for bringing activities together and where activities should sit and are best supported. And many other inputs besides. So during this first phase of consultation, for instance, an awful lot of colleagues, including some in the room I can notice, have fed in their own views and their own thoughts about how we might arrange ourselves to best support the student experience. But going beyond that, there will also be an opportunity for anybody that wants to, over the course of the next several months, and you'll get more details about this in due course, to input and come along and engage in some workshops around all of this activity. So this is not going to be something where you sort of sit back, you hear nothing else, and then suddenly some proposals come forward. We are aiming to come forward with some fully fleshed out proposals for this next phase, the new management model, by the end of this calendar year. And as the timescale on that firms up, we will of course communicate that a little bit more detailed. One of the other things we are trying to do in terms of the way that we are supporting and managing change differently to that we have done previously is alongside, even at the point where we're now talking about indicatively about making change, is about trying to put a range of different opportunities in place to support and often, in many cases, to develop colleagues as we go through. So there's, for instance, been a series of resilience workshops that have started, and the information about those has been communicated where appropriate. And there are a number of other development opportunities that are being specifically put in place, initially for colleagues at grade 8 and 9, and now moving on to 6 and 7 and other operational managers as well. And again, the information and the details about those have been communicated. So this is us investing in colleagues to try and support as we go through periods of change and uncertainty in a way that arguably we haven't done previously. I think the other thing I would say is that we have just been through the first phase of these changes with grade 8 and 9. You've heard me say that's impacted on about 56 roles or so. We don't always get everything right. In fact, we didn't get everything right. And we need to be honest about that sometimes. People try their best. You come into work, you try and get things right. You try and do what you said you were going to do. You try and take people with you. You can't always achieve that, and we need to be honest about that. And again, one of the things we will be doing as we move into the next phase, and we've already done quite a bit of work around this, is just to reflect back on what we got right and what we didn't get right. And again, as and when colleagues have views on that, please, again, feed those in. It's vitally important. Please don't sit in isolation and say, well, guys, actually, if you just paid a bit more attention over here, that might have been more helpful. So that's the new leadership model piece. I'd better fill the billing in terms of SLP as well. So we're quite an exciting phase now with SLP, and I'm going to start first of all briefly with a related project, which is My Manchester. So My Manchester, for those that don't know, is an existing digital platform, if I can call it that, which is principally used by our students at the moment, and it's where we surface a lot of their sort of information that students need. So their timetable, for instance, or information about how to apply for mitigating circumstances, course handbooks, these sorts of things available through there. It works as an app on their phones, iPads, desktops, etc. We are fundamentally, there's been some work going on over the last year or so to fundamentally reshape and relaunch My Manchester. And a couple of weeks ago, we did that in a sort of a soft testing phase. A large number of students have engaged with that, and we've had some really, really positive feedback about that so far. My Manchester will, in a little minute, go beyond being simply for students and will be the new sort of digital front end for much of the developments that we've been doing, not all, but most of the developments that we've been doing in SLP, particularly where those impact on students, but also for staff as well. So the fact that that's getting some really nice positive feedback, particularly about the look and feel and the ease of use, is a really positive thing. Just a short distance from here, a little way over there, is Bainbridge House, which some of you will be familiar with. This is where the core SLP team have been working away, augmented by hundreds, literally hundreds of colleagues from around the university for the last couple of years or so. And we are very close now. In July, we will start to implement on a phased basis over the course of 12 to 15 months or so. There's a very detailed plan which is in the progress of being communicated. We will start to implement SLP, and that implementation has a number of different facets to it. Some of it's technology deployment, and we've started to do a little bit of that already, for instance. You've heard me talk about My Manchester. Some of that is about changes in processes, and some of that relates back to some of the things I was speaking about earlier on. But just in closing, it is important to say the amount of effort and goodwill and people going above and beyond, frankly, to deliver SLP is staggering, absolutely staggering, and is to be applauded. And thank you to those in the room that have been contributing to it.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got half an hour or so to take questions. We're going to try the technology, but you can just use old-fashioned questions from the floor as well. Oh no, we've got loads of questions. I think it's a good one to start with. Will the university support greater working from home arrangements for PS staff? It's hard to say no. What I would say, though, is it depends on what we're talking about. Are we talking about formal home working arrangements or informal home working arrangements? On an informal level, sometimes there's a piece of work that can be best done from home, peace and quiet. That's okay. But if home working is regular and is not part of a contractual agreement, then I don't think that does make sense. Reaction to that? We've got some roving mics as well. I would say a strict answer to that question at the moment is that the university does support a lot of home working at present, actually. Would you all agree with that, or do you think that's a really good thing? You would. Are there times when it's not helpful? Yes, there's an issue about consistency. That's true in an awful lot of what we do in the university. It's partly an issue of scale. Also an issue of culture, I think, in the university. And having that diversity is a good thing, but we need to be really careful that we're being fair and equitable across the board. So we need to be consistent in whatever we do. Shall we move on? That's just disappeared.
No, it's the voting.
Oh, it's been voted up?
Yeah.
Or voted down?
And the second one's been voted up.
Okay, what measures will be used to define the success of the changes? You're changing it as I read them out now, aren't you? Okay, hang on. What measures will be used to define the success of the changes being implemented across PS? Well, our ambition here is to be held in high regard by colleagues inside the university and also outside the university. Wouldn't it be great if colleagues in other universities looked to Manchester and said, that's where I really want to be? That, to me, is the simplest measure of success. Within that, of course, issues like trust, trustworthiness, that Chris has talked to, I think are very, very important.
I can talk about Mike.
Well, but can you be heard without the mic?
Can I be heard about the mic?
You've got the mic.
Okay. So we're talking about measuring success, but from a data perspective, what hard metrics can we actually use to assess whether or not we're successful? Because one thing to talk about people's opinions and feelings about the university, but it's another thing to have actual hard metrics to say we have succeeded because we've got evidence here saying that we've done this and we've delivered it.
Okay, that's absolutely fair point. And when we develop our PS plan, we'll agree what they should be for PS in the future. But what they're going to cover, we want to talk about metrics and measures that you can quantify, will be the efficiency and effectiveness metrics. Okay, we will be very efficient in what we do, but we will equally be very effective in what we do. And that effectiveness will be measured in part by our students and by our academic colleagues and other colleagues that we work with, telling us how well they think that we do. So I think they're going to be really important measures of success for us in the future. And ultimately, you know, our success depends on the university's success. We contribute to the university's success. If the university is successful, then we are as well. I think sometimes what we struggle to do is link the university's measures of success to the work that we do in every part of professional services. That sometimes it's hard to see what the connection is, and we need to work harder at that, at understanding it, because everything that we do directly contributes to the success of the university. I'm getting this now. What do you think hasn't been done right? Can you give an example? How is this example being addressed? Hmm? Yeah, Simon.
With a microphone, that's not right for a start. I'll give you an example. I think we insufficiently clearly communicated in sufficient detail the exact process end-to-end that we were going to go through in terms of consultation and about changes to posts. So we sort of start off and say, well, we're starting consultation, and this is what's going to happen first. And then we come back and we communicate and say, now this is what's going to happen next, and so on and so forth. And I think on reflection, actually, what colleagues have said is actually we just want to see the whole piece. So you say we're going to launch consultation on some changes today, and what are the steps that are going to happen in what order and what timescales. So that's something we are already seeking to address for any future changes. And I'd like to be in a place where, even before we start consultation, actually, we are very clear about what that sort of end-to-end process, sorry to call it a process, but looks like.
Okay. Are there any plans in the near future to restructure, review PS technical staff as is currently being done with PS administration staff? We will be looking at all parts of professional services. That includes technical staffing. And Rachel really is leading on thinking about how we work with technical staff to review what we do and what we need to do in the future. Does that help, Gail? Yeah? Okay. Service. Will the shared values include academics as well as PS staff? Yes. I mean, this is not difficult. There's something we didn't do right before. Developing PSS shared values that didn't apply to academic staff. Or it wasn't that they didn't apply to PS staff, but because there didn't seem to be a willingness to develop shared values for the university as a whole, PS decided to develop its own. And there's nothing wrong with that in itself, but actually shared values are an organisation's shared values. They're all our shared values. You can't have some for one group and not for another group. So this isn't difficult stuff. So the answer is yes, all colleagues in the university. The service provided by various professional services is often poor and interferes with my teaching. Why is there no formal feedback mechanism? Well, that's a good question. There are different ways of feeding back, but I don't know that we have one single portal, do we? Is that really the point that's been made? Maybe if we had a simpler way of... Because we take feedback all the time, and we respond very quickly. But I guess sometimes it might not be easy to know who to talk to express frustration or concern. What is currently being done to look at well-being in the university? Strategic aligning, resourcing. Well, I think our people, our values, is saying very clearly that well-being is very important to us. I don't know whether Simon or Andrew want to talk about well-being and what we're doing currently in the university. Yeah.
So, I mean, I would agree with this. So from a wellbeing point of view at the moment, I mean, as Patrick rightly says, this has come out very strongly in the Our Futures piece. From a wellbeing perspective at the moment, we do an awful lot of very, very good work at the moment, both in the staff and the student space. I think the trick for us now, and the thing that an emerging wellbeing strategy that's in development at the moment needs to do, is to tie that together rather more into a sort of a single approach. So all of the things that we're doing, absolutely, we must continue to do those. The thing that we're not really doing at the moment is taking what one would call a systemic approach to well-being. And what I mean by that is we're not taking decisions focused around well-being. So if I take an estates example, for instance, and think about halls of residence, which is something within my responsibility. If one was taking a more systemic approach to well-being, you would design, as we're trying to do actually, you would design your halls with the well-being at the heart of those. And you'd think about, well, what is it you need to do within those halls to create a sense of community? So one example is within a hall of residence, typically you go in the front door, you go down a long corridor with all the bedrooms off, and then you've got the kitchen area at the end. If you were taking a more systemic approach to well-being, you would design that in a very different way, where you would, for instance, go through the front door into the shared space. So you've got that sort of sense of community and shared space, and people able to look out for each other, and then on into the bedrooms and so on from there. That's just one very, very, very small example. But fundamentally, we'd like to get to a place where we are putting well-being much more at the heart of our decision-making. And if you want to add anything, Andrew?
Yeah, I think from the staffing point of view, I echo much of that. We've had historically extremely good support staff facilities, things like the wellbeing rooms that are relatively new, occupational health, the counselling service, disability advisory service, sports facilities, and so on and so forth, and lots of things that staff organise themselves, like walking tours, various other things. But it hasn't been particularly strategic, and I think some of the things we've not necessarily thought about as part of the wellbeing offering are things like helping people build resilience to cope with ever-increasing demands and change, and they're equally important aspects of wellbeing as well. I think the other thing, and people who know me well will know that I'm often saying this, that we, in terms of the demographic that we attract to take up our wellbeing offering, it is sometimes a bit narrow. I think it's quite gendered, and I think we do need to be thinking about how do we get hold of those, engage those harder to reach groups, whilst of course not wanting to turn away the people that take advantage of our facilities at the moment. But it does need to be more joined up and more strategic.
Thanks, Andrew. This is an area where you could, make suggestions to us. Tell us how we'd do it better. Okay, we need to be taking more risks and allow decision-making to be made at all levels rather than a top-down approach. How is this being championed by PSLT? Well, the first thing I'd like to do is get rid of PCMs. If there's one thing I sign a dozen of every day, it's PCMs. There's our strategic initiative, Matt. Seriously, getting rid of PCMs. I sign off PCMs. What am I doing? I don't challenge them. because I'm not in a position to challenge them. I would say, how has it been championed by PSLT? Well, we're talking a lot about it. A lot already happens at the moment, I have to say. But we just need to, I guess, build some confidence in you that taking risks is not a bad thing. Taking a calculated risk is a good thing to do. You should tell us, how do you think we can build that trust and confidence with you? Do you want to see PSLT taking a risk and failing? And nobody being sacked at the end of it? It does sometimes feel that decision-making here is escalated unnecessarily. And that's not because we want to take the decision, but I think colleagues don't feel empowered to take the decision. It's a two-way thing. Oh, here's an uncontroversial one. We do a lot of poor quality research that we know loses the institution money. When will we start managing the performance of academics? Well, we manage and should manage all performance, shouldn't we? Not just academics, but PS as well. And it's by the way, technically speaking, all research loses money. Doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. In fact, the best research loses a lot of money. Am I right, Andrew?
Yeah, well, what I'd say about that, I was watching that with
Got voted up just for you.
Who along this front row keeps upvoting somebody? Anyway, very, very good question, whoever asked that one. I think it raises a number of issues that I think any research-intensive university has to look at very carefully, because I think in the past, universities were perhaps guilty of seeing research as a sort of ungoverned operation that they benefited from in some mysterious sorts of ways, but wasn't part of core business in some senses. But we just can't sustain ourselves like that, because the financial model of an institution and the relationship between the income it generates from teaching and the costs and income from research are very, very complicated. I mean, as you say, Patrick, every institution does research of variable qualities. Cambridge, Oxford, Stanford. You can't dictate in advance the quality of the research output, and that's one of the things that marks it as being research. It's not deliverable to a gold standard in all cases. So the idea of there being peaks and troughs and variability is just part of the research territory. We need to look at the question about the financial basis of research as well. So Patrick said correctly, one way of looking at it, all research loses money, or pretty much all of our research loses money. Very, very, very few funders fund us at full economic cost or above. And really, you know, the majority of funders, it's hard coded into their funding systems that we have to accept funding on a sub-economic basis in one sense. But we have to adopt a broader perspective, because really we have to look at the links between our research reputation, particularly in international and global league tables, which things like Shanghai Jiaotong's or the Times Higher or the other international league tables of reputation, a huge determinant of student preference, particularly at master's and postgraduate level internationally. And they're very, very much determined by our research performance. And the research performance will be guided by performance in areas that in no way makes money on a basic financial calculation. So that picture, that ecosystem of the financial transfers between a university's operations, hugely complicated, and we need to look at that in a much broader sense. As Patrick says, just to agree and not carry on too long, it's critical that across the board in institutions that we can assure ourselves that all of the staff are performing in a way that's appropriate to why they're here and why we hold the roles that we do. And I think there is a risk in institutions over-assessing its academic staff. Many of them feel completely burdened by continual assessment regimes where the overall impact of that is not necessarily performance enhancing, in some cases performance repressing. But nonetheless, this university takes very seriously the obligation to make sure that our academics perform in the way that we would want them to, and as recipients of public funding for research are entitled to expect.
Thanks, Andrew. And this implies that there is no managing of performance going on at the moment. And I don't know whether that's what was meant or not. There is a lot of pressure on academic colleagues. There is a lot of active management of performance of academic colleagues. I would never...
Link back to well-being, and I think in the academic
Yeah.
sector, and you'll see it in staff survey,
Yeah.
that link between coming out in staff survey between well-being and the assessment regime, how well executed those levers of assessment we have, is really, really critical.
Yeah. I just don't want to create the impression or give the impression that there's none going on at the moment. There is. There's massive pressure on academic colleagues. Is it enough for the ambitions that we have, or should we be more consistent? I'm sure the answer to all those things is we should be more ambitious and there should be more consistent approach around the university. But I could say that of PS as well as of academic colleagues. Okay, we support the student experience in partnership with academic colleagues. When will we start managing, how will they be specifically included in the NLM? Simon?
So the answer is specifically at the moment, we haven't fully sort of worked up a plan as to how we will do that. Certainly I would agree with the point, and it's well recognised that we need to do that. If colleagues have ideas about the best way to engage with academics in sort of schools and other areas where there's an impact, that would be good to hear. I think there's the only reflection I would make is there's a balance to strike as well, of course, in terms of dragging people into lots of meetings that suck lots of time. So I think it's probably about identifying those things that we think are really important to consult on, and where there's those many places and many parts of the student experience where there is true partnership working, there ought to be true partnership working between academic and PS colleagues, and focus particularly on those rather than necessarily consulting on areas that perhaps don't touch on the academic sphere in quite the same way. But the point is well made. Absolutely, we need to do that. Specifically, we're just now working that through.
Yeah. And that applies to all change projects. We are now, with our change programme, trying to build in more time at the beginning of these projects, in the early stages of the projects, to allow really good and meaningful consultation with all colleagues. So that when we get to a plan, we're then implementing a plan that everybody knows and recognises, rather than trying to implement a plan that people think, well, where did that come from? Are there any plans to get BME colleagues into more senior leadership roles? This is a really, really good question. Looking at the results for the last year, we're not great as a university. We're not great in PS either. Only about 8% of PS colleagues are BME colleagues in the university. That's
grade 6 and above.
Grade 6 and above.
Target is 14.
There's a lot more work to be done. There are action plans. A specific example for me is that with the recruitment process for the new Director of Faculty Operations to replace Vicky, who's moved across to BMH, we specifically tasked the headhunters with putting together a comprehensive list, and we got them to go and do research around all the institutions in the UK in the type of role level that we were looking to attract candidates from, and identify the BME candidates to help us improve the number of applications coming through. So again, this is an area where, if you can give us specific advice where you think we could do things better, we're here and listening. We're no longer, this is from Sean Cummins, no longer advertising positions at grade 3 to 6 internally. That decision was made in part because we were becoming too inward-looking in the university and not opening up opportunities for diversifying the staffing numbers. So that's what drove that decision. And I think I've given you the response, haven't I, for the higher grades. Are there plans to be more upfront about how the university is performing financially and against plans and strategy generally? Well, the short answer to that is yes. I mean, the university publishes its financial performance every year. There's a huge amount of information on financial performance in the university. But there isn't an awful lot of understanding about it. And so Steve, and Louise might say something, Steve Daunty has been doing tours of the university to help understand where the money comes in and where it goes out. and thinking about the financial challenges for the future, which I think is helping address some of this.
Yeah, is this working? Yeah. So just obviously, as Steve has been doing, sort of going out and about and sort of going out to different schools and, you know, addressing and trying to sort of educate and sort of help people understand what the sort of finances are. I think obviously there is more that we can do, and I think perhaps we can think about, you know, what we can communicate on a sort of quarterly basis. Obviously there's sort of an element, there's this whole raft of information, it's filtering out in terms of what is useful and what isn't so useful. Also have to be mindful of the fact, you know, we've got a listed bond, and so we have to be mindful in terms of what we actually put out into the public domain. But certainly, you know, Steve and certainly us as sort of senior finance team are very keen that we, you know, be as transparent as possible.
We've got 3 minutes. I think the door's been open to encourage us to go out. We're going to run out of time to go through the rest of these questions. Anybody who's submitted a question, we'll if you've got your name up there, we'll come back to you. If not, we'll still provide an answer and circulate it to everyone. How did you think that went as a format for the Q&A? Did you think it was good? I felt I was looking that way all the time and not at you, so I didn't find it as engaging as normal. But you all thought that was a good process? Hiya.
Maybe you could have asked if there's anybody in the room initially who wanted to ask a question first.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I know. I thought about it, and I think I will do that the next time.
Yeah.
What I then didn't want was to confuse whether to ask a question here or put it up on the screen. But I take the point. Listen, thank you all very much. I hope you found that really useful. If you didn't, let us know and tell us what you do want to talk about in future, okay? Thank you all very much.
Good
The voting is a good idea.
The only thing about it,
it's really impersonal.
Is the first person to ask a question, was Tim.
Yeah, and what happened to it?
He asked his